Okay. Hello. Anyone out there? I am,
Anyone other than on this call, of course.
yeah, I see. Oh, I see zero views.
Well,
Oh
I mean,
dear.
I
Give them
think
a
people
moment.
got used to us being not quite on time, so
Yeah. And here we are. We're only 4
almost.
minutes late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly my fault. So,
No,
Oh
no, no,
no, we were
no.
sitting around chatting, so
So
it's all
yeah.
okay.
not true.
So yeah. So the criteria for getting
Oh,
on the naughty and the nice list. Do you want to lead out, PC?
sure. Yeah, we do have one person here. Charles
Yeah.
Anthony. Hello. Hello, you're our audience today. Okay, let me get rid of this backdrop. Stop sharing that. There we are. Gonna. Well, okay. For our audience, maybe our future audience who will eventually tune in, uh, we are Free Thought Blogs. We're here from the Free Thought Blogs network, and this is our Christmas show. We're going to talk about good and evil, or naughty and nice, if you prefer to think in Santa Claus terms. And the question we are grappling with is, how do we decide what's good and how do we decide what's bad? What are the criteria that we use? Are there even criteria that, objective criteria that allow us to make decisions about ethics and morality and all that kind of stuff that actually are pretty important to a civilized society? Uh, I thought I would start off with uh, maybe an example. Let me see if I can find my example. This is a fairly minor one. This is not a tremendously horrible. Well, actually, it is a pretty horrible example. Um, that this is a news article which has disappeared from my screen now. There it is. Uh,
Mhm.
which just brings out the contrast. What is a good person? What is a bad person? And in particular, can we use religion to recognize this phenomenon? And this is just a little story. This is from the Lancaster newspaper that Pete Hegseth is scheduled to speak at Dayspring Christian Academy, which which is just unbelievable. This is a very, very Christian sort of group. And it says, we're blessed and honored to host this true patriot who loves the Lord and has a long and decorated military career. Uh, and it also says that we pray for wisdom and protection over Pete Hegseth and his work. What work is that? Alcoholism and abuse of women, maybe? Why is a Christian organization pandering to this? And then, of course, appearing with him as well is Ken Ham. We all know Ken Ham. He's the guy who runs the Creation Museum, the Ark Encounter, and all that. He believes that the Earth is 6,000 years old. He's a paragon of ignorance, and there he is preaching. And okay, Bill, Franklin Graham, all these people are associating with Christianity, which nominally we're supposed to believe is a moral organization, and it's pretty clear that it's not. So how do we decide what is good and what is bad in this world where a whole bunch of people in this country think that Pete Hegseth is a paragon of virtue, and we think exactly the opposite. So we got situations like that, and then of course there's all this stuff that's going on right now with uh, there is so much going on. Can I even keep track of it? Yeah, the killing of a CEO at a healthcare organization. which I have no problem with saying was a bad thing to do. But then we've got all these people supporting the healthcare organization, which I think is unambiguously an evil group doing horrible things. So, I don't want to come out and say, oh, Luigi Mangione was a hero. He wasn't, but he was representative of a large group of people who are finding that the current situation is untenable. So the question is, what are the criteria that we use to determine that so and so is a bad guy and so is a good guy? And I'm just going to plunk down on the side of saying, no, there isn't any objective criterion for this. That all we can do is aspire to making life as healthy, happy, and safe as possible for the largest number of people. And even the sad, unhappy people, we ought to be making accommodations to help them progress and advance. So if we could do that, that would be a good thing. Santa Claus isn't going to bring that to me on Christmas, though. So
You never know.
yeah, yeah,
It's a secular miracle.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's what we need. We need miracles now to make everything work.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Don't get me out of
Nobody
humor.
said miracles have to be good, you know. Isn't that a Terry Pratchett thing? Just because
Uh-huh.
it's a bad thing doesn't mean it wasn't a miracle. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
so
and the thing is, it could get much worse. That here we got a lone wolf sort of charging in and doing a bad thing. But if we don't correct the situation, it's a whole mob of people that are going to charge off and do this sort of thing.
Well, and one thing is what I think is important to separate from is who the targets are. A lot of when I've seen people online cheering, this killing and all that, it's always towards the CEO itself. Would they be cheering on, a frontline worker within this healthcare system and all that? Oftentimes they're sort of in an economic precarious situation. They're being exploited for their work. Should they bear the brunt of, people's hatred towards these healthcare systems? That I'm not so sure. In some sense, they are a willing agent. On the other hand, they're just trying to put food on the table.
Well, and
So,
it's also a mistake, I think, to attack the individual when what we're dealing with is really a structural problem. It's
mhm.
the whole way the system is organized. It's corrupt and broken, and that's what
That's
needs to be fixed. And you're not going to fix that by going in and picking off individuals in the hierarchy.
Yeah, and also like we can't kill our way out of it, and it's sort of I see some people on the left sometimes talk about revolution, and it seems like a similar sort of thing where I worry that some people think if we just I don't know capture DC, then we will have control of the country or something like that. And it's sort of the neat thing about systems is how resilient and complex they can be,
Mhm.
and uh, well, I suppose that's neither good nor bad. It just is. But
Yeah, well, you want a good, robust system. You don't want a system that falls apart with one little change. And we're kind of converging on that right now, where we're breaking so many things. And I would specifically say the Republican Party is breaking so many things that we're making the whole system extremely fragile. And if it gets too fragile, then you can get something like a revolution that's going to overthrow, for better or worse, and probably mostly for worse, the whole system.
if I make very slight tangent on the concept of collapse, I did a post a little while back looking specifically at I think it was a kind of pansy in outside of Paris, but basically in response to the decline in insects, the flowers are getting smaller and they're investing less in nectar. Or I suppose the way we should put it is that flowers that plants that invest less energy in their flowers do better relative to those that invest a lot more energy in attracting insects that aren't there anymore. And what this means is that the insects that are still around now have a harder time finding food because the plants aren't putting as much effort in. And
Mhm.
so what you get is this sort of reverberating feedback loop of things shrinking in on themselves and sort of a slow collapse in that way. And that seems to be very much happening in sort of in society as well, in a lot of ways, as sort of people, as things get worse, people sort of draw in a little bit and they stop reaching out to strangers and like that, because you've got to focus on yourself and you can't spare as much for other issues and other people. And that in turn then moves us farther away from being able to actually change the trajectory that we're on and actually work together to build a better world, because we're sort of in the process of collapse, and some of that is just because of the systems that we've been talking about, and some of it is also because at an ecological level, the world is not doing well and everything is sort of falling apart a little bit.
Yeah, but
Uh-huh.
I think there's it's always hard to do, and we have to be careful because we have seen too many creationists making parallels between nature and humans without being kind of careful. But I think we are seeing some symptoms of an unhealthy society. Two things that I think of is always the profit optimization instead of longevity for companies, which is for me has always baffled me. Uh, and the other thing I'm seeing is the gig economy. Like a lot of people cannot get a job, they can get gigs. And those are clear symptoms for me of a society where things are out of whack. Uh, because I mean, if it used to be, I'm not saying for all companies, but for a large group of companies that you actually was concerned about the longevity of the company. But now it's all about the stakeholder payouts and screw the longevity. It's about getting return on investment. Thinking as venture capitalists rather than investors.
Basically, we had initially been talking about possibly discussing the sort of bastardization of Christianity and so on and so forth. And it made me think about, I forget which congressman it was, but years back, I think maybe in the Bush years, Bush 2, there was some politician who went into the stock trading floor and said, I look around this place, look at these people running around trying to make their first million or billion or whatever. He's like, I see this is a holy place. Jesus is here. And I remember at the time, I think at the time I was still a Christian, and I was like, oh boy, oh, what is this? And but the linking of the two. Oh, hello.
Hi. Sorry I'm
Uh,
late. You can put me directly on the naughty list. I should have been better organised. I am just recovering from flu, if that helps. Sorry, you sounded like you were actually saying something interesting. Go ahead.
oh, I don't know about interesting, but I lost my thread. If it's important, it'll get back. I'll get it back.
It was
That's
something about
so
it was a
basically the first thing I've
politician.
done is just
Yeah, it was a politician on the floor of trading floor
Oh yeah. We've sort
saying
of
this was a
got
holy
over the
place.
Cold War. One of the things that we got was the sort of unification of.
You think
Okay.
that's a pregnant
Explicit
pause or
unification of
just
capital.
okay? Go
Oh,
on. I'm sorry.
sorry.
If
No,
you had a
internet
lag.
connection. My connection is unstable. Sorry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
okay.
no worries.
I'll try to condense. Basically, it's unclear to me whether or not it is possible to put safeguards on capitalism because its inherent tendency to concentrate wealth means that it will always create people who then have power to exert on removing the safeguards. And like, I don't know how ironclad of a rule that is, because there seem to be some places and some settings where it can sort of operate in a less destructive manner, but that could just be snapshots. Um,
Yeah, but I
but
just
you know,
can't help thinking that you mentioned the
be
Cold War
fruitful and
briefly.
multiply.
You mentioned the Cold War briefly, but actually, ever since the Cold War, the inequality has been grown larger and larger all over the world. So it might be that we actually need something besides capitalism to make the equality, right?
Yeah, and instead we've got this merger of Christianity
Maybe,
and capitalism to make it even stronger. And that's one of the things messing us up.
But I'm as someone living in a nominally Christian country but a very secular country, I'm very afraid of just saying it's only the Christianity, because we're also getting, though to a lesser degree, more and more unequal here. The growth between the richest and the poorest are getting bigger, and I mean the the age of retirement is rising every year now. That's an official there's an official plan of how about what rate is going to rise. So right now, there's an official age of retirement. By the time I reach that age, it's not going to be that age. It's going to be a couple of years older, and so on. So
Yes, I'm familiar with this phenomenon of retirement age constantly advancing ahead of you. Yeah.
I think the merging with Christianity is sort of, well, us Americans being very U.S. focused. But like, I feel like, oh, am I frozen? No, I'm not. Okay. I feel like I think that China's version of state capitalism is also quite destructive. And is sort of a demonstrated, like they're making billionaires faster than anyone else, last I checked. And, they are also going full on with the exploitation and everything else. And it is the same system being, and the same incentives just being operated from a more central organization. And like, it is also extremely destructive and seems to be extremely corrupting.
Well, I have to question this idea, though, that it's American centric. I know it is, because this particular group, we tend to be very Western centered, and that means we adopt these horrible American values. But can you name a single religion or a single capitalist system that is benign? I can't think of any that are particularly good for the citizens.
no,
Things
but
like
I think that's a point that's worth. I don't think it's Christianity. I think it's the mixture of religion or ideology and capitalism that's really particularly bad. But I mean, even in Russia, where the richest people have a tendency to fall out windows, especially if they somehow have angered Putin, there's still, I mean, the capitalism there is incredible, powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, every religion sort of has their dirty secrets. I'm thinking in particular of Jainism, which, if you're not aware, it's a religious sect whereby essentially they take nonviolence to the extreme, to the point that some of the more extreme practitioners actually sort of sweep the floor in front of them just so they don't accidentally crush insects. It's 100% vegetarian or vegan essentially. It's often it gets pretty easy to sort of see, okay, this might be actually the most moral religion, since they take nonviolence to such an extreme. But that doesn't necessarily mean it is moral. I've also heard some people complain that they hate it when Jain priests come around, because as part of the religion itself, you're obliged to host any sort of Jain priest and basically feed them and house them. Which means, of course, that Jain priests, when they go around the countryside, sort of going from one place to another for whatever reason, they're basically just moochers for the most part, and just sort of take full advantage of their hosts, knowing that it's a religious commandment or whatever, that they must do it. And so they sort of act with impunity in that regard. And this is sort of the central problem with religions, is because of that centralized control, this places a ton of power within a handful of people, and thus it tends to lead to corruption.
I will also say that I've heard a strict Jain argue for using nuclear weapons on Pakistan. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean,
yeah,
Hindus
not
also get this thing.
non-violent.
But if you go around, there is like I think a book called like Hinduism and Violence, with the cover being a Buddhist monk. Actually, no, it's Buddhism and Violence. Sorry, Buddhism and Violence. Actually, the cover showing a Buddhist monk with a machine gun strapped to their back. Especially in Sri Lanka and around those regions, Buddhism has a very strong history of promoting violence, towards other minorities. And
I do feel like I should say a word or two about Quakerism here as the sort of resident expert, which not to say that I think Quakerism is entirely benign. That also depends on what part of the world you're looking at and so on. But the version I grew up in, one of the things I think is interesting about it and appealing is that it operates via a form of consensus governance. And as I've sort of learned a bit more about the world, I think that particular sort of version of unprogrammed Quakerism might be one of the most anarchic religions in terms of its organization. And like it definitely has, leaders within the group, but nobody has actual authority, other than a sort of a very limited sense within a business meeting setting. So,
and this is where I have to remind you that Richard Nixon was a Quaker.
He was a birthright friend.
Oh.
but I mean, Pennsylvania was a Quaker kingdom for a time, and that had a lot of the same problems. And William Penn, after his conversion, did try to sort of have it be a pacifist region, but that didn't really stick, and it still continued with displacement of Native Americans and all of that stuff. So it didn't result in the sort of, I think, utopia that I think some modern Quakers might feel like it ought to. But I think there's a lot to be learned from the way some groups use the consensus governance arrangement, because it is a method that does work at organizing a large group of people across a fair amount of distance.
Sarah, you were going to say something.
Well, it is just in response to the whole Quakers not doing so bad, but having a fairly anarchic method of organising themselves, to which I was going to comment. So it's really just, as they say, organised religion is a problem, and as long as you have fairly disorganised religion, you're probably okay.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of is.
Yeah, it wasn't that funny. Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. It's good. AJ, what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, David Koresh might have something to say on that.
Oh.
But I mean, this sort of gets into what exactly does it mean to be moral and good and all that. And I mean, the example I like to sort of bring up from another context actually are the atomists, from ancient Greece. I think it wasn't Democritus. It was something similar to that. Actually believed that everything was made of atoms overall. That it turns out to actually be correct. The thing is, though, there was no way for an ancient Greek to actually get that right. And if you look at your ancient Greece history, there was this period where basically everybody was just saying, everything is fundamentally X. And so, the atomists basically just by accident happens to be like, okay, they're made of little particles of something and all that. Do we actually credit the atomists with being correct about that? Well, no. The reason for their belief actually came from an invalid, sort of invalid reasoning on that. They got lucky by accident. The same sort of thing might actually apply to morality. If you do the good thing, but you do the good thing for a bad reason, did you really do the good thing?
I'm going to say yes, because whoever benefited from it still benefited from it. I mean, yeah, it might make a difference in terms of how much moral credit do you get, but the effect is still the good effect. I'd rather have people doing good things for a bad reason than bad things for what they think is a good reason.
Consequentialism. Hey.
Well, and I think this also gets it, like, when we say a good action, there's the sort of Christian sense of that, in which we're talking about the sort of the way this accounts towards one's, well, afterlife points, to refer to the good place. Like, is it good because it is something that accrues your karma, your good point, your kudo points with God, whatever, or is it good because it is in some way inherent? I guess we're getting at, is something good because God says, or is it good and therefore God says it is good? In the religious sense.
Well,
And
as a lifelong
obviously, I
atheist,
think
I
we
don't
think
really.
we do.
Sorry, it's a little bit hard because of your delay. It's a little bit hard to hear when you're quite done. So, just sorry if I have to interrupt you. It's not because I don't care what you're saying. It's just delay problems. What I'm going to say, as a lifelong atheist, I don't really care much what God thinks. But the thing is, I was actually thinking of a way to define goodness that's kind of uh, meaningful, and I think for me it's something to do with harm reduction, because I like increase the good, general good, but also make sure not to harm anybody else in the way. A good example right now is Rowling and her crusade against trans people. She's making it to be about protecting women, but her overall actions are definitely not good, even though normally they're about something good. So I think there's a kind of thing to do if you do harm reduction on or helping somebody at the cost of somebody else, then it cannot in itself be a good thing. That's also why killing CEOs are, as a general rule, not a good thing, even if they're for healthcare, because it actually doesn't do anything good. For the only theoretical example I could say, if that murder just made everything, the whole healthcare system change tomorrow in the US, then actually it could be arguably be good, even though it's a horrible thing to do. But that's kind of the only case.
That's not going to happen though, because more
No.
likely what will happen is the healthcare CEOs will build up defenses around themselves at greater expense to the people who should be getting the money, and it's just going to make things worse.
Yeah.
I think in terms of Rowling's actions, one thing to bear in mind is they aren't even harm reduction from the perspective of protecting women, because they're doing the exact reverse. Because we actually, we actually have empirical knowledge that bathroom bans don't protect women. They actually are associated with increasing number of attacks on women, because people start policing who looks like a woman and who doesn't. And so this ends up with attacks not just on trans women, but on cis women who happen to look, not quite female enough for whoever wants to go out there with a bit of bloodlust. And so you've got something that if she were to check on what she was doing, she'd find that actually this isn't even harm reduction. This isn't even a trade-off of, oh, well, we'll just have to sacrifice a whole load of trans people for the sake of keeping cis women safer. We'd find out that, she would find out that it's actually making things worse for everyone. But, she's stuck with what were very good intentions, but which unfortunately were not matched with any kind of willingness to hear the other side and look at evidence on the other side.
I'm not even going to grant her the very good intentions, to be honest. Not any longer. Not judged from her behavior. I could have bought that back in the day, but nowadays it's very clear that the intention is just to attack trans people.
Yeah, the latest things I've been hearing from, it's a lot of British people. What's going on wrong over there, Sarah? I don't know, but the attack mode they're in now is they ignore all the benefits of trans healthcare and instead have decided to focus on, oh, you're going to sterilize children. You're going to mutilate the genitals of children, which isn't what anybody does. But
they're weirdly obsessed with the future sex lives of children. Is
Yeah.
I guess the best way to put it. Like it, I don't really listen to them that much these days, but every time I do, I'm sort of re-shocked by just how kind of creepy and weird they are about all of
Yeah.
this, and it sort of baffles me that people are persuaded by them sometimes.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I don't pay much attention to them either, except that right now I'm in the midst of transitioning out of Twitter. I haven't used Twitter in ages, but I'm just now porting over all my old tweets to Blue Sky and things like that. For some reason, the moderation at Twitter is really weird and hostile right now. And
For
they
some
keep,
reason, yeah. Can't
yeah,
imagine what reason.
I can't either. But yeah, anyway, what it means is I am getting flooded with these notifications of every turf in Britain. People like Graham Linehan. I keep getting these notifications about what he's saying as if that matters to me, as if it's important to the world. So they're amplifying the voices of those people. And that's kind of icky because, yeah, Linehan is just totally bonkers. I just don't want to ever hear anything from him ever again.
No, I mean, the thing is with the trans thing, we know Elon Musk has a trans kid that he considers
Yeah.
dead, right? So,
You know, that's
You-
another distinction between good and bad is I could not imagine treating one of my own children the way Musk is treating that woman. I,
who is
yeah.
an awesome person, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, I do follow her on Blue Sky and I find her very entertaining. But yeah, and it's just like if you're gonna talk about just moral behavior, you know, I would think that really high on the list of kind of a, you know, non-religious set of criteria for what is good behavior, I would put, you know, love your children and treat them well.
Hmm.
That should be way up there. It's not in the Ten Commandments, of course, but it doesn't seem to be on these people's list of values either.
And also just accept them as they are. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, for me, it's completely and utterly baffling. And I don't have kids, so I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, you would think that I could somehow connect to that, but the whole idea
yeah,
of looking at some person that you know and seeing what they've been going through, which I have seen friends who have gone through that with their children, and the relief for many of these people when they figure out what the problem is and how it can be solved is usually so great. And then you look at Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, literally the richest man in the world, who could throw money at any problem if he wanted. He cannot just simply accept.
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and this also gets into should billionaires even sort of exist? You know, I
No,
think there's been a very
simply
strong.
no.
Oh yeah, there's been a big strain in the past about having sort of like a maximal income essentially instead of a minimum income. Where basically above a certain level, the government just takes it all and says nope, ours. And that's really kind of tempting at this point, given just how much of the U.S.'s problems can be tied back to billionaires and people with excessive wealth. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
kind of doesn't make sense.
I can't think of any downsides to that. Just are we really gaining anything by having a Jeff Bezos or a Elon Musk profiting and corrupting the political system along the way?
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think anybody here is going to say yes.
Oh, we're a
No,
bunch of weirdos, aren't we?
quite.
It is actually worth, like, I have to periodically remind myself that over the last decade or so. It's not that the entire world has gotten a better idea of what's going on in the world. It's that I have moved from closer to the center to closer to the fringe. And so now I'm just even more of a weirdo. And like the rest of the world has not moved with me. So really all I got about that is sort of a better position from which to watch everything burn. But
Yeah,
like,
part of that
yeah,
also gets what exactly like modern
we're
communication.
marginal and we can't.
Sorry, I was stepping on your lines there. Delay. Yeah.
I was just going to wrap up saying, we're marginal, and so we cannot. A lot of people on the left need to remember that we can't necessarily expect things to move and to strategize as though we have like significant power at this point in time, or wieldable power. I guess we have the power of the people, but it needs to be organized.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing in the beginning of, the World Wide Web, the internet and all that, that greater connectivity would lead to greater information and more knowledge, and more of a feeling of global community. And these together would combine to sort of create like more moral actions. This is sort of radicalize people. And to some extent it has. But what's really sort of happened is just the speed of communication has increased, not necessarily the quality or anything in that regard. So it wasn't quite as simple as the initial utopian people kind of had in mind, which sort of
Nope.
suggests that morality is tied to what you know, and sort of who is affected by it essentially.
No, but actually, going back to the billionaires, they're actually a bit of big part of the problems with the whole information, because they put themselves in position where they're filtering for the rest of the world, right? I mean, not even. I mean, not even joking. Why is Google search so much worse now than it was 10 years ago?
AI.
Capitalism. That's
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
overarching answer to a lot of things. Is
yeah, but
yeah,
the idea, it's like the idea was the internet information wants to be free and we could get everything on the internet. I get worse and worse results if I try to look for something. And
yeah.
even if I wanted to throw money at the problem, I wouldn't even know where to go to get a better search engine to pay for.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
it does, like, if you go back to the beginning of the sort of the tech boom, you've got Bill Gates sort of setting the stage with his crusade against open source anything, and the
Mhm.
sort of the effort that he put into enclosing the early internet was in some ways a commons, and it was enclosed by the capitalists. And I guess, I don't know, now they're trying to do it to space, but they're running it into the ground like everything else.
Funny enough, Microsoft is actually one of the biggest contributors right now to open source, so that's kind of funny.
Well,
that part,
it still fits into their strategy. They're trying to
yeah.
sort of conquer the world because they realize they can't conquer open source, but they can be the tools that give you open source with that. So Copilot, Visual Basic Studio, and all that, they're releasing that to try and get a monopoly on development. And by doing so, they can then control source code after the fact.
Actually, now I know some of the people actually doing that stuff, Hanselman and stuff, Scott Hanselman and stuff like that. I actually ideologists, so they actually believe in open source. So it's a kind of a mixture of of people getting into the right position to do a positive change, and and actually in this case, a billionaire who got out of the way. Bill Gates is not really involved in this now, so now it's just an ordinary corporation. So in that sense, of all the evil of corporations, Microsoft might be the least bad at the moment of the big tech ones, which
Oh,
is something I wouldn't have said 20 years
yeah.
ago.
I don't think I'd say that even now, but okay.
If you look at the big tech companies, I'll challenge you to find something that's better.
Yeah. I mean, I know that
Mm-hmm.
Apple has gotten pretty evil itself, and
Mm.
Google has definitely embraced the evil side.
Meta is Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
And let's not talk about all the all the Musk concern, right? So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Okay. Is there a good company then?
I didn't say that. I said the least bad.
Least bad. Okay. Yeah. I
So
mean,
that's
that's kind of where we're going toward. We start off talking about, well, let's find criteria for good versus evil, and basically we're just saying we're trying to find something that isn't quite as evil as everything else.
Yeah.
We've scaled down our goals quite a bit, I think.
Well, and we're still sort of falling into a good versus evil trap in some sense, and that you know basically morality only follows on one axis. We can rank everything as good or evil, but is that the only way we can actually do that? Do we have to have this sort of one-dimensional view of morality? Aren't there multiple ways we could actually potentially think of things? Like, is it
We have
good or bad within some context?
obviously there's both God and Satan, and there's
Well, I don't know if you've seen the show Lucifer, but actually, Satan actually was redeemed after owning a nightclub for a while in LA. And
oh, that show.
did
Okay,
end up,
yeah, that was actually a pretty good
becoming
show.
God.
Yeah.
I mean,
boy.
no, I don't think it needs to be a duality. I think dualism is in many ways, you know, a useful tool sometimes, but I think most of the world, most of the universe is neutral in terms of good or bad. It just is. Things are,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
there's it's all relative.
Yeah, morality is something we impose on the universe, and thus it's sort of within our control in the end.
Yeah, but I mean, I also think it's fine that there's things that I do not find acceptable, no matter whatever you do. You could be the kindest person in the world. If you rape somebody, I don't want anything to do with you. I mean,
Well,
that's
if you do, you're probably not the kindest person in the
no,
world.
but you know what I mean. You can behave like the kindest person in the world, but if you have in the past
Hmm.
raped somebody, I don't want anything to do with you. It's
Hmm.
it's apparently that's a context that's hard for some people to understand.
Well, again, Rowling's quite a good example because she is someone who's given huge amounts of money to charity and
Yeah.
has spoken out for women's rights and does do a lot of good, but combines that with a huge amount of harm because of her refusal to actually look at the other side from the viewpoints she's posting and the harm that they're doing. So
Well,
yeah, it's more
to go back,
complicated.
oh yeah, agreed. And to go back to another person we've been being on, Bill Gates. I mean, he has got his giant charitable foundation, which he pours into education and vaccines, which sounds great on the surface of it.
It's not.
But
It's terrible.
yeah, what sort of education is he promoting? He's actually promoting sort of like a private-led education foundation, which educational model, which basically would sort of gut public education and really doesn't sort of align with a lot of with our best practice and what we know actually teaching involves and such. Plus, I think even when it comes to vaccines, he is really helping sort of push vaccines to low income things and all that. But he's sort of doing it. He's also tacking on, okay, I'm going to help you with this, but there's going to be some other conditions that go on. I think involving like intellectual property, but I haven't looked too much into that one, so I might be wrong.
Yeah. But also, there's a fundamental problem here that Bill Gates is not qualified for much of anything. He does not have any kind of educational background. He's a college dropout. He definitely has no background in medicine or biology in general. And yet he gets to dictate education policy and vaccine policy. If he sometimes gets it right, that's nice, but that's not a good way to operate. Let's just hope that the CEO makes the right decision rather than makes an informed decision.
But I mean, the most health secretaries of health don't have the correct background either, and they also get to dictate. So in that sense, I mean, it's like I don't think as somebody who still haven't finished my master's degree in computer science, I can't dictate. I can't be too harsh on other people and not dropping comments. But it is true that you have to. If you don't listen to the experts, then
Yeah,
there's a problem. Yes.
but and you do computer science, so it's like you've got background and experience, and you're well qualified. Bill Gates has never done anything with health or medicine or biology, but here he is trying to make decisions for us.
Yeah, this is a problem with engineers and computer scientists alike, is sort of an overconfidence of knowledge. And unsurprisingly, if you think you know more than you actually do, this leads to poor moral judgments on, things to do, essentially.
Yeah, so the world really should be run by biologists.
I think we can find a few names you would want to run.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're not allowed to speak on moral matters because you don't have a master's degree in computer science, but I have a degree in master's in computer science, then I actually can speak with authority on things like vaccines, I guess. So
yeah,
it works.
Hey. Uh-huh.
I will very soon have a master's in creative writing, so I'll be able to speak with authority on creating worlds, and therefore I should rule the world.
There you go.
Sure, yeah. I think a good creative world is a good thing, so yeah.
And woe and be told, once I get my PhD, then I shall be a god amongst men.
Yeah.
As a person with a PhD, I'm going to have to disillusion you a little bit.
Yes.
Oh yes, but is it a real PhD, or is it just one of those soft sciences like biology?
Now we're going to get into a fight here. That'll be very entertaining.
See, this is where how wars start.
Yes.
No, but back to the subject at hand. It is, of course, deeply problematic, and I think we can all agree that amassing huge amounts of wealth and kind of was spending in that rich man's way of that we've seen since the railroad tycoons, like as some kind of gift, as you have something you could give to the rest of the world, and ignoring completely that the rest of the world actually gave it to you in the first place. I think that's kind of pretty much put me always on noting list, in my opinion, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we can drop off the list of criteria for goodness is money.
Mm-hmm.
That you cannot write to Santa Claus and say, I've been a very rich boy this year, therefore give me more. That just does not work.
Yeah, I've forgotten his name. Oh, and Sarah, you're muted. So while you
I know,
unmute,
sorry, I kept coughing. I was going to say, I think you'll find in practice, though, if you have a lot of money, you're going to find there are plenty of ways of getting what you want and bypassing Santa. That's kind of the way it works in practice. It's the little boys and girls with the rich parents who get the good toys.
Well, and part of the argument against billionaires and such is that in order to even get that amount of money, you must have done some immoral acts in order to do it. It is fun. It's not necessarily that money itself is immoral, but that in the process of accumulating that much money, you have done immoral acts, and thus it's not justified. It comes from the exploitation of others.
I mean, capitalism depends on artificial scarcity pretty much at every level. And so in order to win at capitalism, you must benefit from the immiseration of people who lose because they were sort of selected to lose.
Yep.
Mm.
Does anyone have anything cheerful to say?
Oh, we just found somebody to strike from the good list. So,
well, I mean, if increased knowledge leads to better moral actions, then just by sort of sitting down and trying to learn better about this stuff, we're actually doing better morally anyway. So,
but are we confusing morality with making correct decisions?
Well, I mean, then that's sort of what morality is making the correct decision once the time comes, you know?
Yeah, but what are our criteria for correct decisions?
Ah, that's,
Help people and avoid harming people as far as possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of properly
Well-
consequential.
And I think we'd probably add in there something about helping people to maintain their individual rights to do things, and it's just about balancing those things out.
Yeah. I did do a little bit of reading because I did, you know. Oh, go ahead, Abe. I don't want to step on you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, one possible sort of perspective to take on the question of like what actions are moral in this moment is sort of going a little bit to the extreme of like there are some people who picked up and went off to Ukraine to help defend it. I think there are probably a great deal fewer people who picked up and went off to, you know, defend the Palestinians or to, you know, sign up in Lebanon. But like, if we see a genocide unfolding, do we have a moral duty to put our bodies on the line to stop it? And so are we then all, you know, failures in that regard?
It's an excellent question.
And it's sort of
I can't give you a response to that. I mean, there is, you know, yes, there is. It is a moral. What's happening to the Palestinians is a moral failing of us, and we should, you know, be talking about it and concentrating on it more. But there's also a method of sort of, but there's also the idea of just what is the most effective thing to do. We actually had a lot of these arguments, you know, early on in the sort of uptick in the atheistic movement and all that, where there were people saying like, oh yeah, well we should go over and, you know, convince all of these backwards people in the Middle East and all that of our morals and all that. And it's like, no. For one thing, there is actually a very active feminist movement within there. It doesn't look anything like what it does in the West, partly because they actually sort of got introduced to Western ideals, you know, and sort of views it as being sort of a colonial imposition. Like, this is not our sort of way to do it. But also B, I mean, if I go over to the Middle East and I start, you know, yelling at people, hey, you got to be more feminist and all that, is anybody going to listen to me? No. I'm just some weirdo, you know, white person hanging out over here. It's not really my place to do that. You know, I can basically give, you know, good arguments for people online, and the people within the Middle East can actually, you know, activists within the Middle East can read those, go, oh shoot, you know, this is a good argument and all that, and try and put it into their own local thing and all that. Likewise, I mean, what's happening to the Palestinians is horrific, but is it in my best interest to go over there and be cannon fodder for, you know, Israeli guns? Probably not. What I can do, though, is, you know, speak up and talk about it and potentially sort of convince my peers who think Israel is doing the right thing to be like, no, 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 this is not a moral action whatsoever. This is actually quite immoral. So it's not necessarily a simple of, okay, you must, you know, sell all your things, go in sackcloth, you know, and all that to do that. But, you know, there is still some sort of obligation when you see injustice to act on it in some way. It's just not necessarily in a maximum.
I think that does bring up the realities of how much we can do. And I think it's easy to become depressed or hopeless just thinking about how much we can't do compared to what we can. And I think it's important to keep the focus on what we can realistically do and keep looking at that rather than beating ourselves up because of all the things we can't do.
Yeah, I think I heard one
Actually,
podcast, I can't remember which one, but there was one of the podcasts where they were talking about exactly after the US election that it's actually important to remember to keep focusing on the positive things. So when we talk about who's the naughty, you also try to remember who are actually doing good stuff, and yes, we know that nobody's perfect. So even people doing good stuff now can do bad stuff in the future, and probably not vice versa. I think people doing evil stuff now. I mean, I always say that people don't wake up in the morning and decide to be a super villain. But there is actually a few members of the Bush, no, the Trump cabinet that I actually believe wake up. I mean, one of them guys, Roger Stone. I don't know where he is in the cabinet position right now, but he actually have a Nixon tattoo. I mean, you can't have that and still believe you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also, though, another part of this is that when we're talking about morality, it is not like a Marvel superhero movie, right? You don't resolve things by killing someone else or getting into a battle and getting killed yourself or having a knockdown, drag out punching fight with somebody. Those are not real world options. So we have to get out of that trap of thinking, yeah, I gotta go kill that guy because he's causing all this trouble. We got to think of better, more sensible solutions that respect human life. And
Although
also, yes,
I do want to just play a little bit of devil's advocate here, in that if my pessimism is correct, we are heading towards another era in the West in which there is legitimate, like, in which violent resistance may be the only option, because uh, I forget, I don't know if it was King or X, or I forget who said it, but it was, in order for nonviolent resistance to work, your opponent must have a conscience. And fascists are kind of well known for looking at people who, stand up in a dignified way and thinking, oh, that's nice. You make a good target. And that's not to say that nonviolent resistance to fascism is a bad thing to do, or that people who do it are wrong or stupid. It's just that sometimes it does seem like, taking up arms is
yeah.
this sort of the only real path.
Yeah,
I just
I
don't
will.
know. I don't know that we're at that point yet. I agree. It could get to that point. Give Trump 4 years, and who knows what kind of a mess this country will be in. But
Well, and this is also a part of morality too. Is you also have to if morality and ignorance slash information are also sort of linked, you also have to take into account that if you don't have total information, you may inadvertently do a bad act, and thus it does lead to a sort of, if you're thinking about that, at least it does lead to a sort of conservatism where you're careful not to overreach, essentially to be like, oh shoot, there's not going to be some hidden factor which leads my actions to be bad. Assassinating CEOs might lead to them sort of entrenching into like walled gardens or something like that and become even more strident in what they actually believe in a lot. I don't know whether or not that's true or not, but there are always secondary consequences to such things.
But then I will say there are right now we are seeing a few clear cases where violence, unfortunately, is the only option. Ukraine is a good example. I mean, either they can go over or they can use violence. And as someone living in a country who's contributing a lot to that war, I wholeheartedly support that, because in that
Mm-hmm.
case, somebody else started the violence, fought the violence, and somebody need to stand up for that. And
Yeah, and
it seems a little bit, of course, it seems a little bit weak just to say, okay, somebody else has to stand up for it. But I know also that if how much I would be helpful in the trenches, I would just be in the way of everybody.
yeah, I wear glasses, so sorry.
Well, it's
I,
often been said, like, in most movements, that, like, whether you're dealing with an army or activism or anything, like, you have the people sort of who are actually on the front, and the only way they have a chance of real success is if they have a real support network of different people doing different things in the back, and that ranges from direct supply to winning the propaganda war. And sort of, so, there is that aspect of it.
Yeah, and can I add that is actually something that I very actually is part of in politics, where I actually try to support the local anti-racist parties. Exactly, not because I don't want to be a politician. The nightmare thought of that, but I do want to be one of the people doing the infrastructure behind helping elections get won, because we need somebody to step up and fight in every legal way against these parties, right? So
yeah. And I would like to point out that Rebecca Watson has an excellent sort of trilogy of videos out on nonviolent resistance. Definitely sort of worth looking into. And the overall sort of conclusion of that is that nonviolence resistance works and arguably works better than violent resistance. But even so, the researchers, she was using as her references are very quick to point out that doesn't mean that we should do, nonviolence resistance entirely. There are successful violent resistance methods. And in the past, if you look at a lot of sort of successful revolutions of any sort, it actually was a mix of both. Like I like to sort of bring up the suffragists, in general. If you look at, listen to an excellent podcast series on the history of that within Britain, and if you look at what actually led out, there's again sort of two opposite poles to that. The people who wanted to basically break windows, do mass protests, get in everybody's people's faces. And the other people who are more like, no, we're going to be calm, polite, and we're going to negotiate and all that. And neither side really sort of had the victory per se. It was sort of a combination of both working together, and sort of pairing off where, the political side would look to be, the sort of polite political side would be making some progress and all that. So they would sort of be like, okay, shut up, activist side, stop doing these sorts of things. And sometimes the activist side will listen, sometimes not. But then when things seem to sort of stall out, the violent side would sort of step up and be like, no, we got to be in people's faces and, start doing things like smashing windows, throwing bombs and all that. And that would sort of lead to the political side, stepping in, decrying them, but also getting more power in the process to be like, no, we're the legit side. We're going to negotiate on that behalf. And this sort of, iron fist, velvet glove kind of approach, arguably was probably, the most successful tactic overall. So,
good cop, bad cop.
There's also, and this is something that I think I first encountered in these terms in a thing Michael Brooks did years ago on sort of different stages of organizing, with interview with the person. But basically, one of the things is that it's fairly reasonable to assume, whether you're dealing with a CEO or you're dealing with a government or any powerful entity, that simply getting together in a group and asking them to stop being evil is probably not going to work very well. However, it's very important to take that step, because in any conflict, in any power struggle, a large part of it is about winning hearts and minds. It's the propaganda war. It's getting enough people to support you and your effort, to getting people to see you as the one who is good in whatever struggle you're in. And so even if what you're doing ends up in at violence eventually, it's important to have tried everything else and to have exhausted every other stage, every other option before you get there, not just because that might help you avoid the violence, but also because it's important that everybody else can see that you tried that. And I think that's part of why, like, you'll sometimes see centrist and conservative pundits ask, why don't the Palestinians have their own Martin Luther King Jr., as though peaceful Palestinian protest hasn't been met with violence and assassination and mutilation and all that stuff. Because they want to try to convince people that the nonviolent steps haven't been taken, and that these are just people who just jumped straight to violence. And so, like, there's merit in all of that stuff for that reason as well. Even if you are of the mind that, war is inevitable or whatever, if you want to win that war, then you need people on your side. And if you want people on your side, then you do need to demonstrate a willingness to do stuff without violence. In my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. And it reminds me of an essay I read by Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, in the United States, he's basically sort of fetishized as, the nonviolence resistance guy, blah, blah, blah. But he actually wrote an essay talking about, sort of violent resistance and such. It was sort of at least touching on it. And, he had that line in there such that, a riot is sort of the cry of the unheard. If nobody is going to pay attention to you, what option do you have other than violence? Think of what you will about killing a CAO and all that, but this is going to make those insurance companies, which have an incredible lock in the United States, far more amenable to actually being regulated and maintained, and potentially move towards more of a single payer system overall. If the choice is, getting their leadership assassinated, they might accept a little bit of a little bit of regulation if it keeps their lives, maybe.
Okay, I hate to be the spoil sport, but we have gone on for a little over an hour.
Mhm.
Any last comments? HJ, you said you were keeping an eye on the comments. Anything you want to relay to us there?
It's actually been a really good section in general. I think, let's see, Hemi Scott, Charles Anthony, all that have been making some good comments as well. There's been a lot of good ones, so I hate to hesitate to call it two, but Hemi in particular, I think, made a good point about Satan in the Old Testament and Christian morality that I've been trying to sort of insert it, but haven't been successful in doing so far. So.
Okay, does everyone want to make a last comment and possibly a plug for your blog?
I'll go first since I've got
Okay.
I could just blah 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 forever. Reprobate spreadsheets, the blog, and a lot of what I sort of got from this is because when you go into these university courses and all that, you're supposed to take breadth requirements and all that, and I went into philosophy because I am kind of interested in philosophy. Being a computer scientist, I like the abstract and all that. So and that it's sort of sitting that also meant that I sat down and had to sort of confront morality in some senses. And so there is a ton of good writing from the humanities on morality and what makes a good moral system. Everyone from the ancient Greeks and all that onto like John Rawls. And even Rawls himself is problematic. He himself actually thought that the system we live in right now is pretty much optimal, which hilarious, but nonetheless, yeah, there is a ton of good writing out there from people who have spent, long and deep thinking on it. And this includes things like violence versus nonviolence, sort of approaches to that. Definitely go out and read it. You're going to get far more out of it than reading some dusty old religious text or listening to whatever preacher and all that spouting whatever pablum they've got. Go to the source, go to the basics.
Okay, why don't we go around from my perspective? Let's go to Christian next.
Okay, yeah, well, I have post science. It's semi-active. I occasionally blog it. I have a plan of trying to start to read it up again during the Christmas. So let's see if that helps. If that works, that's not the first time I have these plans, but let's see. And regarding this subject, I think it's I'm less inclined about philosophy. I'm thinking more like real life consequences. But thank you for the conversation. It's been interesting.
Okay, now I guess I'm next here. Yeah, so I'm PZ Myers. My blog is Pharyngula. I'm not that much into philosophy either, I gotta admit. I think philosophy is valuable, but I'm more interested in concrete empirical stuff. So, and if anything, I would rather retreat into just looking at spiders all day long than dealing with morality. Spider morality is very clear. It's nice and sharp and simple.
Doesn't it involve the females biting the males' heads off, or is that a myth?
You're thinking of mantises.
Ah, right.
Yes. No, spider females just bite the males, inject venom into them, and then suck their guts out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So possibly a few people could agree on that morality. Possibly a few minor points to be worked out still, but we'll bear it in mind.
Okay, Sarah, what are you up to?
I have a blog called Geeky Humanist, and I actually haven't been up to much for many months because I've had a bunch of other stuff going on. And however, when I do blog there, I do snarky book reviews mainly. And in terms of philosophy of morality, well, I think we could do a lot worse than the one espoused by Bill and Ted. Be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.
Okay, I approve of that. And finally, Abe, your turn.
Yeah, the blog is Oceanoxia, which is nominally about climate change. I've not been. I've been focused on my creative writing career recently, and that's my primary focus. But I am moving in a more sort of climate change philosophy kind of direction at the moment. I'm getting a little away from news and politics. On that note, I do want to make two comments as a tool. The first is that my connection is unstable. The first is that I am an advocate now of utopianism, not in the sense of, we utopianism as a way to keep in mind what it is that we want. And so perfection is not an achievable goal, but it's something worth working towards. And in line with that, a bit of commentary that's been going around, I would say YouTube sphere recently, just a little bit, has been that the left, at least in the Anglosphere, has become to some degree reactionary in its opposition to reactionaries. Position to the project. Um, because while we can oppose the political projects that we oppose, what
Okay, you broke up a lot there. I could tell you were saying something really good, but
well, I tried.
yeah,
I tried. That's all I can say.
you're going to have to write it on your blog. That's the answer. Okay, well, very good. Thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you to the audience for listening in, and we will try to do this next month. If anybody has any suggestions for a topic you'd like a bunch of weirdos to talk about, pass them on. And with that, I'm going to end the stream here.
Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, we are all done.